She's really frozen, or is
No,
it?
it's a piece of wood.
What?
A piece of wood in there.
She lost her husband, Mr. Paul.
This is the last moment of Johnny Carson, the man who made America laugh for 3 decades, yet chose to step away in silence, as if he had never existed. No televised farewell, no backstage footage, just a brief announcement. He was gone quietly, just as he had lived his final years. But behind that silence were truths never spoken in public. A will kept secret for years. Revealed a $156 million fortune left to a charitable foundation, a gesture no one, not even close associates, knew about while he was alive. A seemingly small rift with Joan Rivers, his longtime friend and collaborator, turned into a wound that never healed, ending their relationship without a single word of forgiveness. Behind the bright lights of the studio was a grieving father, Rick Carson. His son was killed in a car accident in 1991. Just 1 year later, Johnny said goodbye to show business in a legendary final week, shedding tears as Bette Midler sang One for My Baby. He once said, "I don't like loud goodbyes. When I go, I just want to disappear." And that's exactly what he did. But disappearing doesn't mean being forgotten. So who was this man before he became the cultural icon of late-night television? How did a boy from Iowa rise to become the uncrowned king of American broadcasting? And what made him choose to leave without a single word? The story begins long before the spotlight ever found him.
What a nice welcome you had.
Out here, grim. It's like downtown Calcutta with music.
To understand why Johnny Carson chose to leave the stage of life in utter silence, we need to return to the beginning, where a young man from Iowa quietly rose to become one of America's most irreplaceable cultural icons. Johnny was born in 1925 in the town of Corning, a quiet place in the American Midwest, where people lived simply, spoke modestly, and worked hard from a young age. John William Carson was fascinated by magic. He often performed tricks for friends and neighbors. But what set him apart wasn't sleight of hand. It was his ability to hold attention with just his voice. He had a natural stage presence even as a child, though no one in that small town could have guessed that this skinny boy would one day make millions of Americans laugh every single night. After serving in the Navy during World War II, the Carson began working in radio in Nebraska before transitioning to television. The 1,950 seconds marked the golden age of American broadcasting, and Johnny, with his sharp wit and calm charisma, quickly became a beloved on-screen presence. But it was in 1962, when he officially took over The Tonight Show, that his name became immortal. It was a golden era for America, economic boom, the explosion of pop culture, and television becoming a nightly ritual in every home. Within that context, The Tonight Show felt like a national ceremony. Each night, millions of Americans tuned in not for news or politics, but to hear Johnny Carson tell stories, crack jokes, banter with guests, and most of all, make them laugh. And because he appeared night after night for 30 years, Johnny became irreplaceable. He wasn't just a talk show host. He was a habit, a familiar comfort, a part of the national memory. Yet behind the stage lights was a man known for his precision, his guardedness, and his strict boundaries. Carson rarely shared his personal life. He kept a distance from the public, seldom revealing anything about himself on air. That made him even more mysterious, both close and distant at the same time. A curtain always remained drawn behind the laughter. But even though he could control everything on stage, Johnny couldn't control the cracks in his real life. Relationships faded. Tensions with colleagues built up. Quiet pain from within his own family grew. And in the end, he made a stunning choice. He didn't want a public farewell. No farewell special. No grand tribute. No elaborate funeral. It was a decision that left an entire nation who once laughed with him sitting in silence. And that silence is where the real story begins. The one hidden behind the laughter, the applause, and that very last moment when Johnny Carson took the host chair on The Tonight Show in 1962. He wasn't just accepting a role, he was beginning a reign. A reign that would last exactly 30 years. From a late-night program that had little significance, the Carson turned it into a cultural institution. Every night, when the clock struck 11:30, Americans didn't go to sleep. They sat in front of their TVs. They waited for Johnny. They needed Johnny. With his brilliant improvisation, quick wit, and charm that never veered into cruelty, Johnny Carson became a familiar companion to millions of households. For entertainers, appearing on The Tonight Show, especially being invited back, or getting a laugh from Carson himself was almost a rite of passage, a seal of approval for a promising career. Steve Martin, Robin Williams, Ellen DeGeneres, Jerry Seinfeld, many of the biggest names in comedy had their early moments spotlighted by Carson. He wasn't just a host, he was a kingmaker. But fame came with rules. Behind the scenes, Johnny was known to be meticulous. He didn't like surprises. He didn't tolerate lack of preparation. Every punchline was rehearsed. Every guest was filtered. Every camera angle was under his control. Some would say he controlled everything, even the audience's laughter. Carson's success peaked in the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds. The Tonight Show drew up to 15 million viewers per night, a massive number for late-night TV. At his peak, he earned over $25 million a year, making him one of the most influential figures in American entertainment. But behind the thunderous laughter was a man full of contradictions. Johnny went through 4 marriages, most ending in bitterness and heartbreak. Backstage, he often kept to himself, rarely mingling with guests or staff after tapings. And many described him as the loneliest man in a room full of laughter. And then one of the biggest fractures began to show from the person closest to him, Joan Rivers. Joan wasn't just a frequent guest. She was a trusted colleague, seen by many as Carson's unofficial heir. But in 1986, Joan signed a contract to host her own late-night show on Fox NBC's rival network without informing Carson. Johnny felt betrayed. He stopped taking her calls. He never mentioned her name on air again. He never forgave. Never reconnected. A friendship of over 20 years, gone overnight. Joan once said, "I called. He didn't answer. Then someone told me, he said, 'She's dead to me.'" It was the first major crack in the king's image. Then came the second, far more personal, far more painful. In 1991, Rick Carson, Johnny's son, died in a car accident at age 39. Johnny barely spoke about it publicly, but those who knew him saw it. The light in his eyes faded. His laughter lost something. In 1992, Carson announced his retirement. No grand spectacle. No public farewell. No roaring celebration. Just one quiet week of goodbyes, with close guests like Robin Williams and Bette Midler. Bette sang "One for My Baby" and "One More for the Road," a haunting goodbye tune. Carson cried. America choked up with him. That was the last time he appeared on television as the king of late night. but no one knew. It was also the beginning of one of the most mysterious disappearances in American TV history. Johnny Carson truly disappeared in the most literal sense after his final night on The Tonight Show. He never appeared on another TV program. No guest spots. No interviews. Not even tribute events. Friends who had known him for decades never saw him again. And he moved to Malibu, declined interviews, avoided celebrations, even skipped milestone awards ceremonies where his presence was expected. When asked why he didn't attend an Emmy tribute to his own career, Carson responded through his agent, "I think I've appeared enough." But it wasn't just about stepping away from the spotlight. It felt more like self-erasure, as if Johnny wanted to erase himself from television's memory entirely. Many believe the real reasons were rooted in two deep personal wounds: the death of his son and the irreparable break with Joan Rivers. Joan had been one of Carson's most trusted collaborators, even seen as his unofficial successor. But when she signed a contract with Fox without telling him, Carson saw it as betrayal. Worse than silence. He blacklisted Joan from NBC entirely during his lifetime. When Rivers died in 2014, nearly a decade after Carson, she had never received a single call from him. In a rare interview, Joan choked back tears. "I sent letters. I emailed. I reached out through mutual friends. But he never replied." And perhaps that silence was the cruelest thing Johnny ever left behind. But another truth even more astonishing came to light after Carson's death. In 2005, Johnny passed away from respiratory complications caused by emphysema. America mourned. Countless tributes followed. Comedians across generations expressed their gratitude. Then, 4 years later, a surprising headline appeared. Johnny Carson had left $156 million to charity. A staggering amount. Hidden from the public, from the media, even from many close friends. The funds had been quietly transferred to the Johnny Carson Foundation, dedicated to supporting education, the arts, and community programs, especially in his home state of Nebraska. No press release. No PR campaigns. No donor walls. Just an act quiet, anonymous, and deeply personal. But there was still more. After his retirement, the Carson would occasionally send jokes handwritten to David Letterman, the man he quietly believed deserved to carry the torch. Letterman never spoke of it until the late night after Carson's death. On that episode, Letterman opened his monologue with a series of jokes, each one written by Johnny. No grand introduction, no elaborate tribute, just laughter, as if Johnny himself was still speaking to the audience one last time. And when the room filled with applause, Letterman bowed his head, silent. A long round of clapping echoed through the studio. No one walked out on stage. None needed to. Johnny Carson wasn't a perfect man, but perhaps that's exactly what made him unforgettable. He wasn't flashy like a movie star. If he didn't chase headlines or rely on scandal to stay relevant. Johnny was the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice, and yet we could make an entire nation fall silent just to hear what he had to say. That power came from consistency is charm, and the strange comfort of feeling familiar through nothing more than a flickering black and white screen. For 3 decades, he became a nightly ritual for millions of families. In a country full of uncertainty, Carson's laughter became a kind of anchor, a place where people could unwind, smile, and forget their troubles, if only for a while. But offstage, Johnny was a man of deep contradictions. He lived privately, distantly, and at times, he could be cold to those once closest to him. And his broken friendship with Joan Rivers was never repaired. And it wasn't the only unresolved fracture he carried to the end. There's something deeply sad about a man who gave the world so much laughter choosing to vanish without a single goodbye. And yet maybe that's the most Carson thing of all. He didn't want the world to watch him grow old. He didn't crave applause for what had already done. He chose silence. He chose to live the rest of his life as a regular man. No cameras, no spotlights, no curtain calls. And when he left this world, no one could have imagined the scale of the legacy he had quietly built. Not just a TV show, but a way of hosting, a tone, a professional gold standard that late-night television still chases today. Carson never wrote a memoir, never revealed backstage secrets, never sat down for a final tell-all interview. But he did leave a will. Not just one of money, but one of character. Do the right thing, even if no one's watching. So to you, who was Johnny Carson? The king of late night, the lonely father, the legend who hid in the shadows, or simply an artist who knew exactly when to leave the stage? When the final stage light went out, people weren't just saying goodbye to a talk show host. They were saying goodbye to a memory, to a piece of their youth, to a part of America. Johnny Carson didn't leave a farewell letter. No dramatic goodbye speech. But perhaps the things he chose not to say were his most powerful parting words. A man who had once made millions laugh chose to say goodbye with silence. And maybe because of that silence, people started listening more deeply. In his simple jokes, they heard depth in a raised eyebrow. They saw understanding in his quiet disappearance. They realized not everyone needs applause to carry on. Johnny Carson's legacy doesn't live in viral clips. It's not stored in a museum. It lives in the way he gently touched the audience in a style uniquely his own. Gentle, quiet, never asking for credit. Today, when people rewatch old episodes of The Tonight Show, they still laugh, even though the world has changed. Because what Carson left behind wasn't just humor, it was a feeling. We once had someone like that, someone who knew exactly when to step back, someone who understood that sometimes absence is also a form of presence. There are stories we thought had been forgotten, but now you know the truth behind that final round of applause.